who's our usual project manager. So Maya and I will be doing Kirsty's role. Next slide. Recordings of our past monthly Zoom meetings and other project materials can be found on our website, boston.gov/blue-hill-avenue. Next slide. So our project goals, the number one goal is to improve pedestrian safety along Blue Hill Avenue. We all know how challenging it can be as a pedestrian, and this is something that we want to improve and as part of this project. We also want to expand transportation options and reliability. We know that taking the bus can sometimes be a challenge with the traffic, with the number of issues. So we want to definitely make the buses more reliable and make other options such as biking and walking and driving more reliable. And our third goal is to connect infrastructure investments to the work of other city departments. So we really see this as not just a transportation project, but also an opportunity to work hand in hand with our Office of Housing, with our economic development team, address the environmental resilience of the corridor, and also to make improvements to the public realm. Next slide. So our meeting goals today, we want to orient residents and anyone on the call to the background of this project, where it came from, who's involved, and why this and how this process is different from other engagement processes that the city has conducted. We want to provide updates about planning studies and engagement activities along the corridor. And we want to respond to some common questions that we receive about the Columbus Avenue bus lanes and a study associated with that. We want to share some project updates about a related initiative along Blue Hill Avenue. In this case, it's going to be the green infrastructure program and how it intersects with Blue Hill Ave. And then in the end, we want to provide an overview of some upcoming engagement and how you can stay involved. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Shavella.
Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, we just want to lay some ground rules. It's something that we do with our youth often. Streets are public places, and these changes will affect how we get around in the future. And people are coming with different thoughts, opinions, and experiences to this meeting. So we just ask that, one, you maintain respect for others in this space, for those of us who are working on the project and doing our best to make sure that this is an inclusive process for community members who are part of this, and for municipal agencies. And please, maintain that respect in the chat when you're speaking. We also ask that you use I statements. Just speak about your experience on Blue Hill Ave. And if you're representing a group, to just mention who you're speaking for. The third is to step up and step back. So obviously we do want to hear from everyone, do want to hear your thoughts. But if you feel like you're someone who's speaking often, we want to make sure that others who are in this space are also able to be heard and feel comfortable being heard. And there will be some time at the end of this meeting for reaction and discussion. So if you could hold off on questions or put them in the chat until then. Thank you.
So for tonight's agenda, we'll introduce the team, do a quick project overview, and discuss some of the public commitments. We'll respond to common questions about the project and specifically about Columbus Ave and the bus lanes on Columbus Ave. We'll provide an update, or really an introduction, to the topic of green infrastructure. And we have a guest tonight, our Director of Green Infrastructure, Kate England, and we'll talk about how to get involved. And I'll turn it over to Jeff Rosenblum from the engagement team now to do an introductory poll.
Jeff, you might be on mute.
Yes, I am on mute. Thank you. Introductory poll. I just launched it. We like to get a sense of, for the people that are in the room, how people travel around. There are 3 questions. One is main way of traveling around. And then also zip code, if you'd like, just to get a sense of people who are here, where people are from. If anyone has any difficulties, you can answer the question just in the chat, which is, what is your main way of traveling along Blue Hill Avenue? Bike, bus, train, drive, walk, or other. And then you can put your zip code in the chat as well if you want to. All right, about a third of people have responded. All right, so about half of people have responded so far. If you're having difficulties with the chat or with the poll at all, feel free to put it in the chat, no problem. Question is just, what is your primary way of traveling around Blue Hill Avenue and why? And then put in your zip code if you want. All right, a couple more people. All right, I'm going to close the poll, and if all works out, I click on share results. People should be able to see general distribution of people who are here with us tonight, how people get around. Over half of people are driving, people taking the bus or train, some people biking, and some people walking. Can everybody see that? Great. All right, and I will pass it to Maya. Charlotte. Maya, Charlotte.
Back to me again. So we're going to take a moment here to introduce the team and go over some project overview and commitments. Next slide, please. So on the public sector side, we have from the Boston Transportation Department, my colleague Kirsty Hostetter, who's the project manager. She's not here these evenings, but tonight, but she usually does manage the meetings. But we do have Maya Mudgall, who is a transportation planner with BTD, Graham Moitoso, who's a transit co-op, and myself. I've been focusing on the Mattapan Square portion of the project. From other departments, we have Kenya Beeman on tonight. Kenya Beeman is the community engagement manager for BPDA, and also she's been guiding us and is also a Mattapan resident. So she has that resident expertise. We also have colleagues from the Office of Housing, Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, Office of Neighborhood Services, New Urban Mechanics, Arts and Cultures, Disabilities Commission, Age Strong, and with MAPC, who've been advising and consulting with us and helping us to do engagement for this project. On the MBTA, we have Andrew McFarland on tonight. He's the MBTA Transit Priority Manager, and Eric Shire, who manages capital delivery, Philip Cherry, who is working on transit priority, and then from MassDOT, Benjamin Muller from District 6. And I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. So I'm Stephen Gray with Grayscale Collaborative, and I've been consulting with the city and with community leadership, along with Powerful Pathways, Consult Lila, Tool Design Group, and Real Talk for Change. And you can see some of the faces of folks that have been involved from the consulting side of the table. We also have community partners that we've been meeting with on a very regular basis now for over a year, many of them, and some of them more recently. That includes Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council, Morningstar Baptist, Mattapan Square Main Streets, and Garrison Trotter Neighborhood Association. We also, in addition to the Boston Transportation Department, have been working, as Charlotte said, with BPDA through Kenya's participation and MBTA with Andrew's participation on a regular basis. And there are a number of community-based organizations that we meet with semi-regularly every couple of months to have conversations about where we are in the process and to get feedback about the general direction. That includes Greater Grove Hall Main Streets, of course, Garrison Trotter as well, Project Right, Franklin Park Coalition, Mattapan Teen Center, Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Mattapan Community Health Center, and the Franklin Park Zoo. Next slide. And we're doing this, we know, in the context of a lot of work and a lot of attention. We know that the mayor has specifically focused on Blue Hill Ave as one of her key initiatives, project areas, and that there's a lot going on that precedes her time in office and continues and has been expanded since she was elected. And so this, if you go to the project website, this slide is in most of the presentations. And when you hover over each of these different names of a project, it gives you a link and you can learn more about those projects that are going on as well. Next slide. So we have made it a point, goal number 3, if you recall, is about this being more than about just transportation. We know that public infrastructure investments impact all sorts of things, including the quality of the street that people walk on, including the cost of rents for small businesses, including the cost of rent and your property taxes for homeowners and renters. And so we've wanted to make sure that we are both considering these things, but also working with the agencies that are responsible for these different aspects of community life. So we have had not only a number of public meetings, workshops, community walks, pop-ups since 2019, but we also have been meeting with and including, in fact, a number of other departments and agencies in this process and in our monthly meeting updates. And you'll hear about green infrastructure in particular tonight. Next slide. So there are 3 commitments that the city has made, and I think these are really important just so that people understand where we are in the process and what there is to be still decided. And so the city and the engagement team are committed to a data-driven decision-making process. So the next part of the agenda, actually, we're going to talk about a sort of post-implementation study on Columbus Avenue after the center running bus lanes. This was flagged very early on in this process by community leadership that before you do any other project, bus lanes or not, that you look at stuff that you've done and evaluate its successes and its drawbacks. And so we will be sharing some of that data from that study that was initiated on behalf of and with the guidance of community leadership. The second commitment is that the city and engagement team are committed to, first and foremost, improving pedestrian safety. So whatever happens, whatever gets decided, whatever are the elements of the cross-section of the new street, pedestrian safety is going to be the top priority in any change that happens. And commitment 3 is that the city and engagement team are committed to really being true to the fact that public funding, that your tax dollars won't be spent in ways that you don't see fit for your neighborhood. And so while it is true that the city has expressed its position that it thinks that center running bus lanes, for example, are a good idea, there are many in the community that have voiced an opposing position on that. And at the end of the day, once we've had this process and it's been thoroughly vetted, we will be going with the consensus position, which may or may not include that, but the city is not going to spend money on things that have not been agreed upon on a consensus basis by community. Next slide. So we tend to share some feedback. We've got a lot of different things going on in terms of our engagement. We had organized drop-ins with city officials in both Mattapan Square and Grove Hall. And so just some highlights from some of those conversations that sort of show the spectrum and range of things that people are interested in. There are folks that are interested in center running bus lanes. The first and last quote sort of say that. There are people that are concerned about rents changing and going up and them not being able to stay in the neighborhood with any investment at all. And so thinking about gentrification and displacement and housing is going to be key, as I mentioned. People feel that as a driver, it's currently unsafe to even drive along Blue Hill Avenue, and that parking tends to be a challenge. And we know that there are places where there are double and even triple parked cars, which contribute even further to traffic and congestion and the lack of smooth travel along Blue Hill Avenue. Blue Hill Avenue is in need of major change. People are frustrated by wait times for the bus and that buses are overcrowded. And there also was some mention about street trees and the need for taking better care of those street trees and other plantings along Blue Hill Avenue. And that when they aren't taken care of or when they're planted in a condition where they can't survive, that sort of indicates and looks like a lack of investment and a pattern of disinvestment, in fact. And so that's one of the things we also want to talk about, in fact, tonight, which is green infrastructure, tree plantings, the pedestrian realm along Blue Hill Avenue, what's possible, the innovations that the city has been developing, and some ideas and thoughts for the public to consider and to share your ideas about. Next slide. So I'll pass it back to Maya to give us a little overview of the data that we've looked at for Columbus Avenue.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everybody. My name is Maya. I'm a transit planner at the City of Boston, and I've been working with Kirsty and Charlotte and the rest of the team on the Blue Hill Avenue Transportation Action Plan. At our past meetings, we have addressed questions that we've been hearing from folks in the community, and this month we are going to respond to this question, which is, what was the impact of the Columbus Ave center running bus lanes on traffic? So before we start, I just want to give a little bit of context. The Columbus Ave center running bus lanes opened in October 2021 near Eggleston Square. The bus lanes are less than a mile long. They run in the center of the road and have boarding platforms there as well. They were the first center running bus lanes in New England, so we've received a lot of questions about them, how they work, how traffic has been impacted, the general impacts on the neighborhood. And we conducted an analysis to look at those impacts, and we're sharing that first with you all here tonight. Like Stephen mentioned, the second half of this meeting is going to focus on green infrastructure, but because we have this analysis ready, we wanted to share it with this audience first, and the full report will be published and made public later this week. We are also going to send out the link to that report to everyone in this meeting later, so you can have a chance to look at the full report. I'm just going to give a summary here. So the study methodology we used, we looked at two different types of data. We looked at general traffic data to focus on the impact to vehicles. So that's personal cars, other types of vehicles that are on the street. We did that through looking at vehicle data through a platform called Streetlight. Streetlight is a third-party data provider, and it uses location-based services. So that's things like location-based apps on your phone. It uses GPS systems, smart vehicles. It takes that data, and we use that to analyze where vehicles were moving, how fast they were going, things like that. We also looked at data that impact on bus riders. So that's bus travel times, and we used MBTA data for that, ridership numbers, also from the MBTA, and we had rider satisfaction data that we collected from an in-person survey that the Livable Streets Alliance collected at bus stops on the center running bus lanes in early December of 2021. So that's 2 months after the bus lanes opened. Before we go further, if you have questions about the methodology, I'm unable to see the chat while I'm presenting, so please do reach out at this email here, transit@boston.gov. We would be happy to sit down and talk through the data with you. I recommend reading through the full report once it's released later this week, so you can have an understanding of what data we're looking at and the outcomes that we came to, which I'm going to talk about now. So the first outcome that we found is that today the Columbus Ave bus lanes are used by about 4,900 passengers every weekday. we have a nice little graphic here. And in that survey, I mentioned that livable streets collected, over 75% of bus riders were satisfied with the new bus lanes. During rush hours, so that's peak traffic, peak travel times, the bus lanes, which again are less than a mile long, save bus riders 3 to 4 minutes each trip. So that's in each direction. So if you're doing a round trip, that's about 7 minutes per day. And the time savings from buses taking less time to operate on their routes means that you can actually operate more buses with the same amount of operators because each bus is taking less time to travel its entire route. We added up the travel time savings amongst all bus riders and found that the bus lanes on Columbus Avenue save bus riders in the equivalent of 81 hours per day, which is enough time for someone to drive from Boston to Los Angeles and back again. And that's time savings per day with all of the bus riders on these lanes. Here's some quotes that we got from those bus rider surveys and some bus operator interviews. Up here on the top left, this is the driver of the 22 bus, one of the drivers, and some other quotes from people that we spoke to at the bus stops. So I'll give you a second to just read these. And again, this will all be in the report that we release later this week. So now on to vehicle traffic impacts. After the Columbus Ave bus lanes were built, so we looked at April 2022 as our post-implementation point. That was 6 months after the bus lanes were built. We wanted to give folks some time to get used to the new streetscape and for drivers and bus riders and pedestrians to adapt to the new landscape. We found that it took, on average, only 20 to 30 seconds more for people to drive on this stretch of Columbus Avenue. So again, that's that about 0.8 mile stretch. 20 seconds was at off-peak times and 30 seconds was at peak times. So when traffic was at its worst. Sorry, one moment. So to be clear, this is after construction was completed. We recognized that while construction was happening, traffic was much worse on this part of Columbus Avenue. And we also recognize that people's experiences traveling along this stretch of Columbus Avenue may be different. These were the averages at off-peak and peak periods that we found for vehicle traffic. After the bus lanes were implemented, we also found that about 10% more vehicles were obeying the speed limit, which is 25 miles per hour on city streets. So cars are traveling slower, and that means safer streets. Like I just mentioned, auto speeds have declined by 1.5 miles an hour. Just means that people aren't speeding as much, which is good for safety. We've also heard from from folks in the neighborhood and neighborhood groups that traffic is diverting onto side streets because some people may want to avoid driving on Columbus Ave after the bus lanes were implemented. So we looked at vehicle travel on those side streets, and we did find an increase of traffic on Walnut Avenue. Here in the graphic, you can see it says about 5% more traffic on Walnut Ave. We also found a slight decline in traffic on Crawford Street, which means that less cars on the road, cars are traveling slightly faster. So we do see increased speeds. In order to address this, my colleague Charlotte has been working on some traffic calming measures, which she'll talk about in a second. But I do just want to mention again, the full report will be made public later this week. We'll be publishing it and releasing a press release. We're going to send that link out to everybody that is RSVP'd for this meeting. So please take a second to look at the report. If you have questions about it or would like to talk about it in more detail, please email transit@boston.gov and I'll put that in the chat so we can set up a time to talk more about the analysis. And we know that there are likely to be a lot of questions about this. This has been something we've received a lot of interest about, and we'd like for people to read the report and reach out. We just want to mention we're focusing on green infrastructure for the second half of this meeting and would like to dedicate the Q&A to that topic. But please, if you have any questions about this data, please reach out. I would love to chat further about this, especially with the technical team that conducted the analysis, if you really want to get into the data. So thanks, and I will pass it to Charlotte to talk about traffic calming.
Okay, thank you. So we recently completed a speed hump program within the Garrison Trotter neighborhood. So we added over 90 speed humps spaced generally 200 to 300 feet apart. And they are on most of the streets in between Walnut Avenue and Elm Hill and Warren. So as you can see on this diagram, the streets that are outlined in blue have the speed humps, and the little tiny black dots are actually the speed hump locations along those streets. We're working with Mass DOT on a grant. Mass DOT will be constructing traffic calming in the 6 locations that are shown with the circles. So 4 of them on Walnut Ave, 1 at Humboldt and Monroe, and 1 at the intersection of Crawford, Abbotsford, and Herald Street. And the design of the traffic calming at these intersections, it's still, MassDOT is finalizing that design. We did do a site walk with some members in the community. Those will likely include raised intersections, some curb extensions, and at Humboldt and Monroe, we're still working on what that design would be, but we would definitely be adding a second crosswalk to that intersection. It's at a bus stop, and we see youth, running across the street to get to the school bus in a location where there's not a second crosswalk. So we know it's on us to add that crosswalk at a minimum and to look at some other safety improvements. So that's what's happening. That the MassDOT 6 intersection project is at about 25% design. So the hope is that they would complete the design next year, and they would be constructed either towards the end of next year or the beginning of the following year. And I will now turn the mic over to Kate England, our Director of Green Infrastructure.
Thanks, Charlotte. And apologies for my camera being off at the beginning of the meeting. I'm having some bandwidth issues. So I hope everybody can hear me. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about stormwater and green infrastructure in the city of Boston. As Charlotte mentioned earlier, I'm I guess I'm no longer new, but the Director of Green Infrastructure for the city of Boston. I joined the administration back in July of last year, and most of my work, in the past and in my new role has been around designing and installing green infrastructure throughout the city of Boston. Next slide, please. So to understand green infrastructure, kind of basic intro to stormwater is typically pretty helpful. So stormwater is exactly what it sounds like. Break the word down. It's water that comes from storms. And when you live in an urban environment like we do, with lots of roadways and buildings and hard surface, when rain falls on those surfaces, it can't absorb into the ground like it would if it fell in a forest or a field. And so rather than absorbing into the ground, it runs off, and that water is called stormwater. Next slide, please. So what is the problem with stormwater, or more specifically, the way that we currently manage stormwater? So the current issues with stormwater are kind of broken into 2 categories. First is stormwater or water quality, and then the second is the quantity of water. Many of us have lived in the city for most of our lives and are very familiar with some of the things that end up on our roadways and our sidewalks. And so when stormwater travels across hard surfaces, it picks up things like pollutants and litter and sediment and nutrients and all kinds of other things that we don't necessarily want in our water bodies. So we are working very hard at the city to improve the way that we manage stormwater quality in the city. And the other issue is water quantity. For those of us who have been in Boston for a while, I think that we can all say with relative certainty that we're getting a lot more storms, and the storms that we are getting are more intense. And so as a result, we are seeing flooding on our streets and our sidewalks, where we live, work, and play more often. And so the city is also putting a lot of effort into trying to provide, better stormwater management, reduce flooding where we can, and to, generally make the city more safe and more resilient. Next slide, please. So just an image for everybody. This was pulled from the Climate Ready Boston viewer that you can find on the City of Boston's website. The teal areas on the map are areas where we expect to see inundation or flooding when we get the 10-year, 24-hour storm event. And what that means is it's a storm that we would expect to see maybe once every 10 years. And the storm would have a duration of about 24 hours. So you can see from the map that the teal is kind of evenly distributed throughout the city. And so we know that, these stormwater issues are going to be affecting us all. Next slide, please. So what is green infrastructure? For the purposes of this conversation and just kind of general knowledge, think of green infrastructure as features that use plants and soil and other natural materials to remove pollutants from stormwater and to allow stormwater to absorb back into the ground like it would in a natural environment. There are two images on the screen right now. One is of a rain garden, which is one of the more common green infrastructure features that people have heard of before. And another is a right-of-way bioswale. And what these two features are essentially just shallow, depressed areas that water can flow into and slowly absorb into the ground. They're typically planted with native plants, flowers, and other things. They're very attractive. And they, like I said, they also help to reduce flooding and remove pollutants from stormwater. Next slide, please. A few additional green infrastructure features that you might be familiar with or might have heard of. Green roofs are becoming very common, not just in Boston, but across the world. There's some really beautiful examples here and many, many beautiful examples internationally. Porous paving materials, so things like porous asphalt or porous concrete, are hard surfaces that allow water to pass through them. Constructed wetlands are exactly what they sound like. They're wetlands that are built by humans. They function very much the same way that a natural wetland functions. They provide lots of storage and remove lots of pollutants from stormwater. And stormwater tree pits and tree trenches, you've probably walked over these and maybe not realized that you were walking over them. They, at the surface, look a lot like just standard street trees, but underground there's a stone area, stone reservoir that holds onto water, feeds that water to the trees, and also creates storage and other things that are needed for our city streets. Next slide, please. So green infrastructure, I've talked a lot about stormwater, but it also has a lot of additional benefits. Green infrastructure is a really wonderful tool for making your city more resilient. I'm not going to read all the bullets on the screen, but a couple of kind of highlights are they can help cool our city by adding trees and other vegetation to our neighborhoods. They can improve air quality by allowing trees and vegetation to remove pollutants from the air. They can help us address some environmental justice issues that we have in our city by providing better access to nature and the environment for people who live in neighborhoods that is kind of low on vegetation right now. They also provide opportunities for food security. You can grow food in them. And they also are really wonderful opportunities for environmental education, which I think is a really great kind of additional benefit to a lot of the green infrastructure that we're designing in the city right now. Next slide, please. So just want to give everybody an idea of, how this might be coming into play on Blue Hill Avenue. So we at the city implemented a policy back in October of last year that was specific to our public projects. So when Boston Transportation and Boston Public Works are, doing a project that changes the curb line or changes the curb geometry in a roadway, we are now using one of the 5 green infrastructure design alternatives that you see on your screen. So the image that you're seeing on the right, there's this kind of triangle space that's a lot of concrete with some red brick in the middle. That is what we used to do when we would change the curb geometry in the city of Boston. We would build these large paved surfaces, and oftentimes they wouldn't actually be used for anything. So rather than building these large kind of concrete and asphalt islands, now we're building rain gardens, bioretention areas, tree pits, and a variety of other things that add green space to our neighborhoods and help us to reduce things like urban heat island effect. The policy also has 2 maintenance contracts that are being used to maintain green infrastructure in the city. And they also are going to result in a volunteer program that we're actually working on getting up and running now, where residents and others will be able to adopt green infrastructure features and get involved in their care and you know, in kind of advocating for them and asking for them, hopefully, in their own neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So just a couple of glamour shots of green infrastructure, because they're really beautiful features. So these are some of the things that might be possible along Blue Hill Avenue. And then next slide, please. I have a couple of examples of projects that we've actually built in the city of Boston already. So if you are interested in taking a look at them, or maybe you've already seen them, just kind of drawing your attention to them. So New England Avenue in Dorchester is an example of a project where we were able to install some beautiful bioswales and rain gardens in the streetscape. The project was initially a transportation project that was doing traffic calming along the road. And rather than just leaving it as painted markings on the roadway, which you've probably seen across the city, we were able to take this to the next step and actually build some green infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this is the image once the pavement markings were put in for the Slow Streets initiative that was done here. Actually, technically, I think it was Vision Zero, but for the traffic calming work that was done here. And then next slide. And then this is what it looks like today. So in those hatched areas, we have now built rain gardens and bioretention areas. Next slide. This is the before image before the rain gardens were put in. Next slide, please. And then this is the after image after they were constructed. So the road is a little bit smaller than Blue Hill Ave, but just an idea of you know, a transformation that we've already done in Dorchester. Next slide. I have 2 more examples, and then I will pass it back to the transportation team. And that's the rain garden today. Sorry, next slide. Another example is a project that we did in Central Square in East Boston. For those of you who have been to Central Square, it also started out as a transportation project and morphed into this wonderful collaborative project where we were able to add a lot of green space. We were able to add, I think it's like 150 trees, I believe, were planted, and a variety of other lovely amenities for this neighborhood. Next slide, please. So this is the before image. So you can see the park in the middle used to be this oval with kind of a large roundabout, I guess, around it. There were 7 major roads that came into this intersection. The traffic pattern was confusing. Crossings were very long for pedestrians. There was no bike infrastructure. Next slide, please. And this is the after image after the project. So we're able to enlarge the park area quite a bit. We were able to create bike infrastructure, shorter, safer pedestrian crossings, a more logical traffic pattern. And again, this project included all kinds of different types of green infrastructure, from porous paving materials to tree infiltration trenches, and some beautiful surface features as well. Next slide, please. I think I have some before and afters here. Okay, so this is the before image when we were building this project. You can see the trees along the right side of the image. This is when they were first planted. This picture was taken about 5 or 6 years ago. Next slide. And this is the after image. This is what the trees look like today. And again, remember, this is only 5 or so years of growth. So you can, Maya, could you actually click back and then forward again for me, just to show people before and after? So small, oh, actually, yeah, that works too. I forgot I had another view. Never mind. So again, the trees from a different angle, and then one forward. And these are the, keep going forward. Sorry, Maya, I didn't mean to like confuse with the thing. And these are the trees today. So small trees that were put in, they were, 2-inch caliper trees, so very small trunks. And now less than 5 years later, they're 5-6-inch caliper trees. They're very healthy, happy. And these pictures were actually taken during the drought this year. So when all the trees around them were suffering a little from lack of water, the trees in the stormwater features actually did a really, they did a lot of growth during the summer, as opposed to showing signs of stress like the trees around them. right, next slide. One more and then we're done. The next or last project, this is South Street and Bussey Street in, it's technically in JP, but it's in the Arboretum, or like, you know, in the roadways that run through the Arboretum. This is another example of a project where an intersection was teed off. So traffic calming, shortened pedestrian crossings, increasing safety. And as a result, we were able to add a lovely bioretention feature in that kind of green triangle space that you're seeing on the bottom right there. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial of what the roadway looked like before. You can see the cars for scale, like how large this intersection actually was. It was a very confusing space to move through as a vehicle, as a cyclist, and as a pedestrian. And then this is the next slide after image. So the intersection is much more logical. There's a safer crosswalk, a shortened crosswalk. And then there's this beautiful bioretention feature in the corner, next slide, which you can see in this picture. So planted with lovely flowers and shrubs and other things, and looks really lovely today. I think that might be it for my slides, but just wanted to give everybody an idea of the direction that the city is moving. We are really prioritizing green infrastructure in our roadways, in our right-of-ways. And the main reasons that we're doing that, in addition to the stormwater benefits, are really to just green our neighborhoods, add some trees, add vegetation, help to work on some of the heat resilience issues that we have, some of the air quality issues that we have, and also just to generally beautify our city. So I'm happy to answer questions later once we get to the Q&A part of the presentation, and happy to share slides with people if they're of interest as well. And yes, I just saw the thing in the chat. The city is maintaining them. We have the 2 maintenance contracts that I mentioned as part of the new policy that we put in place in October are used to maintain features like this. And some of you may have seen, if you've driven around the city, the green infrastructure features that were built several years ago are now getting regular maintenance. And so by regular, I mean like weekly maintenance. So say hi to the maintenance staff if you see them out there. They're doing great work. And we're also going to be doing a lot of replantings and other things if neighborhoods would like to be involved in those. And we're envisioning a strong neighborhood component for any green infrastructure that we build on Blue Hill Ave as well. Thank you for your time, everybody. I really appreciate you. And I'll kick it back over to Charlotte and Maya.
Or to Jeff, who will launch another poll and unmute himself.
All right, so over the years, people have been asked what are things that people want to see more of, and we have some data from before, but wanted to get a sense of what people in this room were thinking. This is just to get a flavor for what everyone here would like to see more of in terms of extra stuff on Blue Hill Avenue. So the poll asks this question. As before, if anyone's having difficulty with the official poll, you can take what you see on the slide and type it into the chat. It's fine. All right, about half of people have responded. If you're one of those who has not yet, you still have the chance. All right. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. I think people can see them all now. This kind of shows that there's a lot of different things people want to see. So This is generally lined up with what we had heard before, that this is the list of things people would like. And I will pass it back to Maya, I think. No, it's still me. Look at that. So I have them both up side by side. I don't know if others do, but trees and greenery in the poll from 2019 got the most number of votes in the survey, and that survey in 2019 was about 600 people, and that was one of the top items that people mentioned in today's poll. The others are public art, real-time bus arrival, and light fixtures, and those also are the top ones today. So I'd say that generally the things people are mentioning today are in line with what we had heard from the survey a couple years ago. Back to Stephen.
Thank you. These monthly meetings that we've been having have been opportunities for us to try to bring different folks together and share information back in terms of where we are in the process and different studies that are being done in response to comments, questions, and things that folks have been bringing up in these meetings. But we also have a number of other engagement activities and opportunities that we've mentioned a few. We have had the drop-ins. We have a pop-up exhibit, which is actually going to be on 27th in 2 days at Grove Hall Library. And there's also another public meeting, Not Your Average public meeting, hosted by Consult Leela on April 27th as well. So if you can get to both of those things, they're actually close enough that you should be able to attend both if you can. Please do. If you go back, I sort of skipped ahead. We also have Real Talks, which are small group conversations, which we're hosting multiple times a week. And so if someone could paste in the RSVP form here, or you can use the QR code, which you see on your screen, and just open up your camera and a little link should pop up. Those Real Talks we'll be doing for the next couple of months. And we really want to get as many people engaged in those as possible. Our goal is to have 50 of those talks. And I think we've had maybe roughly 5 so far. We need roughly 4 to 8 people for a talk to really be as fruitful as it could be. You'll be compensated for your time. It's $40 per meeting that we share a gift card. So it's an opportunity to really share your ideas, get to know your neighbors, and contribute to another avenue of engagement that we have going on with this project. Next slide, and then the next after that. So yes, so I mentioned the pop-ups, I mentioned the Not Your Average public meeting and the Real Talks. We shared comments today and feedback from the Grove Hall Public Library drop-ins. These monthly meetings will continue through July at least. And so please continue to come on the 4th Tuesday of every month. We are going to be beginning bus rider surveys on routes along Blue Hill Avenue. We are working with Livable Streets Alliance to do intercept surveys, so that you may encounter someone on your commute asking you a few questions and to complete a survey. I do believe also that they're going to be offering $5 gift cards for local businesses along Blue Hill Avenue, so look out for them. And then there's also an opportunity to do that online if you don't have time, you're running late for work, or to pick up the kids. We've also been surveying businesses along Blue Hill Avenue, and we've been working with Mattapan Main Streets and Grove Hall Main Streets to make sure that those surveys are well structured and also getting to the right folks. And we also plan to work with our interpreters to make sure that we're talking with businesses that represent different language groups, that we can make sure we're getting all the feedback from all the folks that we can. And also what is really exciting, I think, about this process, which is rather unusual to most public processes, I would say, in this country, but certainly in Boston, is that we have a very, very focused youth engagement agenda, which is being led by Consult Lila. So that's Shavella and Chevelle, who are meeting with youth from middle school to high school age. And we also will be working with them on some of those real talks as well. And so we're hoping that we can talk to as many people as possible with as many different perspectives as possible, so that when we bring the qualitative feedback to bear, and it's time to really kind of make a decision about how to move forward, that that we haven't left anyone out and everyone has had a chance to share their views and their feedback. Next slide. So I'll pass it to Charlotte just to talk about contact information and other logistics. And then we're going to have plenty of time for conversation, I think, right after this slide.
Yes, so if you'd like to speak with someone by phone, the phone number is 617-635-3944. And then we have our website, boston.gov/blue-hill-avenue. And you can also email us at bluehillave@boston.gov. And last but not least, we have a form that we'll put a link in the chat if you'd like to ask your question through a form. And with that, we'll turn it over, I think, to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to kind of facilitate. We can probably stop sharing the screen so we can see each other. So I'm going to just open it up for folks to raise your hand and share your thoughts, either on the Columbus Ave study or on green infrastructure or on something else that that is relevant to this process that is on your mind. I want to start just by saying that, you know, we, the consulting team and the city team and the community leaders that we've been working with now for a long time, a year and a half, are really hopeful about this project. We see this as an opportunity to make a positive investment in a neighborhood that has deserved that investment for quite a long time, but has been overlooked. Many of the people on the team, including myself, have lived in neighborhoods that have been disinvested. And there's an opportunity here for you as residents of a community that is on the precipice of this really kind of significant investment in your major corridor to have a say in what that can be. And so we're hoping that people are thinking about this aspirationally. We acknowledge that planning in this country has very often and typically been harmful in Black communities and communities of color. And we have been working very hard to change that direction with this project. We see this as a potential model for the way that this city, and in fact, other cities in the country, can do things differently. That is our genuine and honest and sincere desire in this process. So just to address one of the questions about the data, you know, data is data. It's not a lie, it's not untrue, but it is not necessarily something that aligns with your personal experience. You know, the data is an average of different experiences at peak times in this case. And so within an average, there are extremes on either end. There are people that feel that that commute is much better, and there are people that feel that it's much worse. And so we just want you to keep in mind that we as the consulting team are committed to an honest and transparent process. We would not be comfortable with and would not be sitting here in front of you sharing data or information that we did not believe was at least factually sound. And we are also here to hear the discrepancies between numbers and statistics and what people actually experience, because your experience is your life, and that is important, and that needs to be centered in this process. So I just want to address the data question. And before, since no one has raised their hand yet, I'd like to also maybe bring up some of the questions that have come up in the chat already. The capital investment versus maintenance. And Kate, you said now there's money take care of things, but I'm sure people have
Want more
seen that
details?
happen yet.
Yep.
And so, like, can you explain how this works, how it's different, and how people are going to see this kind of maintenance and can trust that it's going to be happening in their neighborhood?
Yeah, and there was another question that actually got like really into the weeds about how the plantings and things would be done. That's different from how they've been done in the past. So I'll answer that question as well.
Yep,
But
the depth and the cracking sidewalks and all that stuff.
Yep.
Yep.
To your question though about maintenance and capital. So my role is new as of July last year, as is the office that is being built around my role. So with my, my job and then my future staff and the office that is being built, I have a capital plan of my own, I have an O&M budget of my own, and it's very specifically focused on green infrastructure, and that includes tree plantings and other vegetation in the right of way, but also outside of the right of way. So schoolyards, libraries, community centers, and kind of across our public realm. So the two maintenance contracts that I mentioned, that was one of the first things that I procured when I joined the city. It was maintenance had historically been a barrier to building green infrastructure in the city and to adding green space to the city, because there was a question of who would maintain it, how would it get maintained, and where would that money come from? And so I made it very clear that as a condition of doing the work that I'm now doing, that maintenance had to be factored in and contracts had to be procured to cover the time period between right now and when we start to build the city's internal capacity, meaning hiring staff, training existing staff, and buying equipment that's needed and so on. So these contracts they're in place for the next 3 years. And then obviously we'll rebid them, or hopefully we'll have additional staff, by that point as well. But they're dedicated specifically to this kind of maintenance. So all new projects that we are building moving forward will get basically captured by these contracts to have that kind of basic maintenance done on them. And then there's additional maintenance efforts that we're working on, like the volunteer program that I mentioned. We're also hosting our first National Green Infrastructure Certification Program training in May of this year. So the city is also offering trainings and other resources to residents so that we can build this kind of green job field, but specifically build the green infrastructure job field. And so that's another thing that I would like to put out as part of this community engagement project, that we're hosting these trainings. There's going to be internships and employment opportunities and a variety of other things that I think we'd really like to get people who live in our neighborhoods into these programs so that you can be employed and do the maintenance in the neighborhoods that you live in. And also obviously get a paycheck for it. So there's a lot of really wonderful programs that I'm currently building. And the maintenance contracts were just kind of the first step to cover us until we built all of these additional programs. So there's a lot more coming out of my office. And I'm really excited to meet everybody here, because I'm hoping that you all can, help form and shape these programs, because you all know more than I do when it comes to what's best for your neighborhoods. So looking forward to that piece. And then the question about how are we installing them differently? So green infrastructure features are actually, they're very different from a standard like street tree pit. So currently, and some of you have probably seen this, when we plant trees on the street, we have a small cutout in the sidewalk, and there's a very small amount of soil that the trees that we're planting have access to. They're not planted very deep. And most of what they're trying to grow through is called dense grade. And what that means is it's basically like it's gravel and fill that goes under the sidewalk to keep the sidewalk level, but it's not great for trees. And so green infrastructure features have, it's a special soil, it's called biossoil. And then they also have large subsurface, like stone reservoirs that are, they hold a lot of water. And so tree roots are able to access water underground, and they're able to get air to their roots underground because of the void space in the stone. And that means that tree roots don't reach for the surface. So the reason that we get heaving and cracking in sidewalks is because tree roots are reaching for water, they're reaching for air. And the place to get those things is at the surface. And so by creating these green infrastructure features that have a lot of material underground and below the trees will reach down into those areas to get their water and to get access to their space for growth. So there's a totally different type of planting, totally different type of construction that goes into green infrastructure that's specifically designed to help keep our sidewalks and our streets level, to help provide trees with the water and the air that they need to survive. So all in all, just a better result, from green space in our right of ways. I wasn't sure how into the weeds people actually wanted to get about this, but I'm happy to talk more about how green infrastructure works, how we build it. I'm happy to share some details for basically images of how they're installed and how they're designed. So if people are interested, I'm always happy to chat more about that. This is something that I obviously enjoy very much.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up on that quickly before we open it up, if you have contact information or information you could share in the chat about how people can learn about the training and employment opportunities connected to this. And if you have any idea about what the hourly rate might be, people might also be interested in knowing what that is. I'm not sure if that's something that you've decided yet. But let's open it up. So Ms. Dotton, and let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name, asked to unmute. So Ms. Dotton, you should be able to unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay, I probably was. Thank you. Yes, it is Dotton. And what I'm hoping, you know how they keep putting these white sticks up in everywhere to try to control traffic and stuff. I hope that you all are not going to be doing any of that.
Maybe I can pass this to Charlotte.
Yes. So we use the white flex posts when we're doing what's called a quick build project. And we do that to quickly improve the safety of a roadway. Blue Hill Avenue is not a quick build project. We're going to spend a lot of money in what's called a capital project, where we'll actually be doing kind of heavy construction. The idea is that we'll do it well and we'll do it once, and so we won't have to come back. So and the same is true actually for Cummins Highway. There was a quick build with flex posts, but that's now going to be followed up with a capital project that will include street trees, green infrastructure, and the type of things that Kate was talking about today.
Thank you. Ms. Dodson, does that answer your question sufficiently? Oh, you can unmute if you like, but if it has, that's fine, and we can move to the next.
I'm sorry, I was having a problem unmuting.
Nope.
And yes, okay, that answers the question. And I hope that they're not doing the bike lanes like on Cummins on American, because I thought, the words are American Legion Highway and Cummings Highway. And I didn't think bikes were allowed on highways. And I think that taking a whole lane to make a bike lane, and I'm a bike rider, I think that's just ridiculous, because that's a mess on American Legion Highway.
Maya or
With the bike
Charlotte,
lane.
would you like to address the comment?
Yeah. So on American Legion, one of the concerns was speeding. And so the original goal was really to try to prevent the really high speeding that we were observing during COVID and even before COVID. So removing the travel lane did achieve that objective. And then we had the additional space, which we then, ended up using for the bike lane. But I do understand people have different opinions about the outcome. But for people who ride a bike, it's certainly a lot safer, and also for really for everybody, it's safer because the traffic has been slowed.
Thank you. Ms. Green, you can unmute yourself. Ms. Green, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Oh, good evening.
There
How
we
are
go.
you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good. I'm going to be all over the place with this,
Go
but
for it.
so we can start off with the Columbus Ave. I give it a high D minus. Very not happy. I think I understand what you're trying to do with the buses there, but having the streets smaller is not the answer. I'm from Boston, born and raised. Boston City Hospital, it used to be called. I'm 52 years old, and I used to like to drive around my city, and it's so sad. All these speed bumps, I understand, but the newer cars, they just run right over them. I went by 2005, with it's not too good. But okay, so I told you about Columbus Ave, not happy with that. So we could go to American Legion. I don't see all those bikes. I don't know if you are from Dorchester, but I don't see all these bikes you're talking about. I don't. I used to go, well, Save a Lot, but now it's Price Right. So when I used to take that turn, it's do not enter. So now I have to take the turn by, what's that, Little Nats, the fruit place? I have to take that left and go in the back to get to Price Right. That's how I enter. And, you know, people crossing over, you know, to get to the stores, you got to be careful. And then when you go a little further up to Cummins Highway, up there near the gas station, near McDonald's, oh my God. You know, when you're driving, you're on the left lane, and then the people in the right lane is trying to get in front of you because the street cuts off with these little white things, those things. And then when you go a little, no, I want to get back to Price Right, near the car wash, and how they, you know, when you're in that left lane, and then when you get in front of Baby Nats, they're merging right into you, like they're gonna hit you. I don't know if I'm explaining that right. And what else I wanted to say about that one too? And when you want to take that left to Morton, it's kind of like, it's kind of weird, you know, because it's like all this space, but I got to get way. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if I want to get on Morton Street, like past Baby Nats, I'm going to Morton. It's a lot to take that right. That's what I'm talking about. But okay, then I want to go up to Cummins High. No, I want to get back to American Legion, how the cars are parked in the street. And you can see sometimes people done crashed up in their cars and all of that. I think this was the beginning of it. Do you know what I'm talking about? How the cars are parked in the street near that school right there is apartment building. And then I want to take you up to Cummins Highway. What is it, past Monument Place, and how the cars are all parked in the middle, like in the street. I'm like, who does that? I don't know when the last time I was in Washington, D.C., but I like how they had theirs, you know, like if the green, all the lights are green, you know. I know you want to do green space, but we need more. It seems like it's more cars. It's just like everybody got a car. And well, I want to take you to Blue Hill Ave, where Dunkin' Donuts and the bank, and how you could take the right to go and you know, Stop and Shop. But if you're not taking that right and you want to go straight, that they're merging right there. I mean, I've seen some almost collisions. There probably has been some collisions. Right there where the cannabis places, like before that, like the entrance of Stop and Shop. And I don't know about it being smaller, because it's just so many cars, like 3 or 4 o'clock. It was so good when the kids was on vacation. I mean, I could drive, you know. It was just like, oh man, it wasn't hardly no traffic. It was some traffic, but it wasn't as bad when the kids, you know, 3, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. It's awful. It's awful. And I couldn't put down. I walk, I take the bus, I'm on a cane.
Yeah.
I'm not riding a bike. My son rides a bike, but I don't see a lot of people biking like they need their own lane, because half of them be on a sidewalk, you know? My daughter got hit by a bike on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a lot of great points.
Yeah, so that's where I want to leave it. I think that's enough.
That I think that's really helpful because
Oh yeah, and there's no parking on Columbus Ave. It took away all that parking. I used to park and get on the train. Now you can't even do that. So where's all these people parking that Academy Homes? Where's all these cars at? And I know they're hurting because I know they used to park out there. Dimick, all that. There's no parking.
So the things that you're bringing up, I think, are really helpful because it gets into what we need to sort of be figuring out through this process, which is how when you do one thing, it affects other things, and what are the trade-offs for different things. So, more parking spaces perhaps means less space for pedestrians or bikes. A bike lane maybe means people don't get hit by a bike on the sidewalk, but it maybe means less room for sidewalk and street trees. A center running bus lane maybe means faster moving buses, but one less lane for moving cars. A side running bus lane maybe means that it's on the curb, but then now there's less parking because it has more places it has to pull over. So one of the things that we want to do in this process, and this is going to be upcoming, and I'm sort of getting a little bit ahead of myself and the team, but I just want to let you know, we will be looking at different scenarios and the trade-offs between these scenarios, and we will be studying those with you so that you all can see that with this, if we take this approach, this is a plus, this is a minus. How do we weigh those two things against each other? There's no single approach that is going to hit every single thing. We need to have a balanced approach to enforcement, which is under-enforced. We need a balanced approach to buses getting through, because a lot of people ride buses, actually. We need a balanced approach to drivers, because this is actually a Black neighborhood in the United States of America where a lot of people own cars. And so it's important that be acknowledged and prioritized. People need to park. There's also pedestrians, right? So all of this stuff. And I think, Ms. Green, you have really stated all of the issues across these different roads. And we want to make sure that on Blue Hill Avenue, we're taking all of those things into account. And we're making sure that you all have the ability to judge and make your own assessment of what is the right direction for you and what's not. What are you willing to give up a little bit of to get a little bit more of something else? Because at the end of the day, there's no, we get everything everywhere all the time, or the whole street shuts down. So we really need to be figuring out what we want to do and what we want to prioritize together. Mr. Elisa, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. You guys have spoken a while, and I've heard a lot of things, but I must say, having been a part of this process for almost 5 years now, I'm a little disappointed that we're still at the same point where we have not defined what it is that we want to do, what we want to accomplish through this process. It's not clear to me what is the goal of this project. A center line or sideline or whatever it is, going down Blue Hill Avenue from Morton Street or from Mattapan Square to Grove Hall doesn't say to me that this is something that's beneficial or meaningful for the people who live in the area, particularly along Blue Hill Avenue. I mean, I can't understand the benefit of a centerline railroad or bus lane, from Mattapan Square to Grove Hall. What is the benefit? And that's what I keep asking. What are you trying to achieve? We all know that a better enforcement of the traffic laws, Chapter 90, by the police and the transit police and the city's parking and traffic parking would improve, have better improvements on the time for people in the bus lanes. It would have better time for you stop the double and triple parking. But you want a talk about a construction alternative to spend money, but it doesn't say the community's gonna be better. What's unfair and what's disingenuous about the whole process we engage now, everything is being done in silos. It's silos. You're talking about the trees in silos. You talk about the bikes in silos. You talk about the bus lane in silos. You have to talk comprehensively about how all this happens and what it means to the residents of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. You have said nothing about the disruption that this project will have on the lives of people for 2, maybe 3 years. You said nothing about the impact it will have on small businesses in the area. You have said nothing at all about how this is going to affect the quality of life of people who have to breathe more smog and more pollution because you've slowed down traffic and you have not taken the amount of traffic or volume off the road. There are health issues that you've not discussed. Slowing down traffic doesn't mean there are less cars. It just means that those cars that are coming through stay longer. They send more carbon monoxide and pollution into your homes. They kill the trees that you plant because if you don't have a way of moving that along in the air quality and airflow because of heat islands that are created, you have more problems and not less problems. I'd like to know what is the overall goal and objective that you're trying to reach in identifying a traffic lane for buses and rapid transit from Mattapan Square to Grove Hall. And when it gets to Grove Hall, then what? Then what? So we got a community that's going to be impacted, and we want to know what happens to them. We want to know exactly what you're going to do. We don't see a plethora of bikes running through here. We don't have 100 bikes that come down my street. I don't know what comes down Blue Hill on a regular basis. So we just want to know, and I just give me a chance to finish because you guys have been going on for an hour and a half saying what your vision is. I just want you to say what the facts are. I want you to say what the reality is of Columbus Avenue and the impacts it's had on Garrison Trotter community, because the quality of life in my neighborhood has been profoundly affected by people trying to get around the obstructions you create along Columbus Avenue. We've seen an 85% increase in traffic coming through, moving faster. Our lives are not safer and they're not better. So for the folks who are coming from Mattapan to Jackson Station, God bless them. For those who are trying to get across Humboldt Avenue or Harold Street and Walnut, it's not a benefit to them. So try to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there, so I'm going to try to go through all of them. So the goals for the project, as you asked, are improving pedestrian safety. That's first and foremost. So any project that happens, any capital investment, any construction that is beyond management is going to, at a minimum, include improvements to sidewalks, improvements to street trees and plantings, improvements to the public realm and the pedestrian experience, and improvements to pedestrian crossings and safety. That is the minimum commitment that the city is making. That does not need to involve bus priority in any fashion or manner, but that is the minimum number one commitment. The second commitment is a balanced approach to transit modes. So making sure that cars can move more predictably and more safely through the corridor, that buses can move more predictably and safely through the corridor, that pedestrians are safer along the corridor as buses and cars are moving, and that if bicyclists are a part of this equation, that they are not running into people on sidewalks and that they're not getting run over in the street. So it's measuring, it's looking at those different factors and trying to decide together where the trade-offs are and which things are going to be prioritized. None of those things have been determined, but those are all on the table. The third question was the third goal is de-siloing the ways in which things happen. You are so absolutely correct about the way in which planning happens in this country, really, which is by department, project by project. One of our primary goals, the third goal of this project, is to de-silo that process, to make sure that we are considering green infrastructure, that we're considering housing, that we're considering parking, that we're considering gentrification challenges and threats and mitigating those or avoiding those to begin with. So the siloed nature of the way things usually happens is absolutely accurate. One of the goals of this project is to de-silo, and so that is a constant challenge, and we welcome your input, further input, which you've given a lot of, on how we can continue to move in that direction of de-siloing. Construction disruptions will be things that will be addressed throughout this implementation. All projects, any major investment and any major physical improvement in neighborhoods takes a period of time to actually do. And so there will be disruptions, but we will be coordinating with businesses primarily, but also residents, to make sure that people know when there are going to be delays, where there are going to be, challenges to get by where there's specific construction happening. And yes, we haven't gotten to that point yet, so we haven't talked about that very much publicly. When we move to the point of implementation, that will be the center point of the conversation. You talked about pedestrian safety. Pedestrian safety is key, and it's at odds with faster moving traffic. So we need to make sure that we're looking at all of the considerations and figuring out how to balance those things. The Columbus Avenue study, when it is released in its entirety, we will be having a conversation with you in our weekly calls, which you join, as well as the bi-monthly calls, which we convene a larger subset of community leadership in. And it will also be shared publicly with everyone on this call and everyone who logs into the project website. And as Maya suggested, she will be, and others on the team will be here on an ongoing basis to have conversations with folks to answer any questions about the methodology, the data, and what we can do in addition to that to make sure that we're capturing lived experiences beyond what the data says. So that was my attempt to answer all of the questions that you posed. Hopefully I was able to do that successfully. So I will first see if there are any other questions or if I've missed anything in the chat. And if not, we have, oh, it's 8 o'clock. I'll let you respond to that, Mr. Elisa, if there are no other questions or comments from others in the meeting. Ruth G. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Ruth G.
Thank you. Thank you for giving that extensive, well response. But in addition, the presentation that kind of laid out a lot of that. So thank you for that recap and the response. What I would add is, as someone who travels regularly on Blue Hill, there's a need for massive change on Blue Hill, and that's just the reality of it. If there is improvements in the aesthetics, it drives more business to those smaller businesses. It makes them more lucrative. And as we speak about gentrification, one of the best way to keep our businesses there is to patronize them, because it's clear rents are gonna go up for those businesses. So making it a safer space where there's lighting, a greener space so that the air quality is better for those who are patronizing it is a must. Now, I know we continue to discuss some of the different experiences with the bus lane. As somebody who lived in Roxbury when that new bus lane came there, I do understand some of those frustrations. And especially since part of that bus lane was right by a McDonald's. And by that, I mean, I don't think there was a consideration to the number of individuals that patronized that McDonald's and how that started to back up traffic. So the only thing I would ask as it relates to the bus lane is that as the city is working to think through where it's going, just thinking about the times in which and what businesses are near those bus lanes, and how that impacts traffic. Because to your point, we already have double, triple parking that happens on there. That's with the bus lane being there. It's not going to necessarily make that go away if some of those items are not taken into consideration. So I just wanted to kind of share that. It's great to know that as the city's doing this work, that we as residents have the opportunity for the past few years to give input and insight. I think that's incredibly important, and we have to acknowledge how important that is in this space. The only item I would add is as we move towards once that process comes to implementation, that question I have is, will the city return and give residents the opportunity to decide on how some of the aesthetics will look, making sure that we have proper energy efficient lighting that's going down the street, making sure that some of the trees that are coming into those spaces take into consideration, like pollen and individuals who have allergies. And I think these things seem minimal, but they're not once you have to live and be in them. So once the city starts to potentially acquire assets that are going to go along Blue Hill Avenue, the selection of those assets, I think if we're going to be thorough in this process and showing us how beautiful it can look, it'd be great to also know exactly what is going in there so that when these things do pop up, residents are not shocked by what they see.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to pass that to Maya to answer. That'll be the last question for tonight, but I think it's an important one because we're moving very quickly now. It's been a couple years that we've been engaging you on a monthly basis, or a year now, but we are moving quickly to start the design process. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking at scenarios first to look at trade-offs, not options. the difference between options and scenarios is options is like pick one or pick two and merge them. Scenarios are things you would never do, but you want to look at in isolation. So you would never only do center running bus lanes. You would never only change the parking layout. You would do different things, but you look at each of them distinctively so that you can see what's the positive, what's the negative, and how do we factor that in. But in terms of people's ability to be engaged once the design conversation starts, Maya, if you could talk to that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to end on, is that once anything happens, like after we are holding these monthly meetings, once we start to move into the design phase of any sort of design that we come up with, we're not just going to disappear. We're going to continue engaging with community and making sure that people are informed and also are engaging in continuous discussion on any decisions that we make. So we will be present throughout this entire process. We're committing to that as a city and as an engagement team. I also noticed that in the chat, some folks are looking to talk more. That's great. We're always looking to talk to folks. We are at the Grove Hall Library from 10 to 12 every Wednesday. We'll be there for at least the next few months, if not longer. So if you'd like to chat, please come at any time. You can reach us via email. You can reach us on our website. We have a form that you can fill out with questions. You can give us a call. We are available to talk, so please just reach out if you have any further questions. We'll be here listening, discussing, engaging in conversation. So thanks everyone for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all. And we will see you next month or sooner. If you come to a Real Talk, please sign up for a Real Talk. I mean, please, we want to have these conversations. All of the team has gone through the Real Talk process, so they're actually really meaningful experiences. And we also will share with all of the participants a $40 gift card. And there's the opportunity, if you feel like you've participated in a Real Talk and you've enjoyed it, for you to get trained and be a facilitator and facilitate as many of those conversations as you can convene your neighbors and friends to join. And as a facilitator, you're compensated at the same rate that the consultants are, which is $125. And so I will open it up one last person, Alenza, and then we will close it out with Alenza's final comments. So Alenza.
Thanks, Stephen. Just wanted to make a quick reinforce the message around the Real Talks, and the purpose of the Real Talks are very different than the purpose of these meetings. As you all can see, we have been engaging in a lot of different methods for community engagement because you got to try different things to reach people in different ways, right? And that's why we do these public meetings, why we do these pop-ups, why we do these special, community meetings and gatherings, why we're holding, have these online forums. That's also been shared. Let's share that again. There's an online link where you can share your comments as well. And then these meetings, these monthly meetings have largely been for the purpose of reporting back, giving an update of where we're at, what new information that has been compiled. If you really want to have time to sit down and talk through things, the Real Talk is really a great space to do that, because these, online community meetings are not built for the kind of in-depth conversation that I know folks are really thirsty to get into. So make use of the different types of avenues. One, show up and get other people to show up at the meetings, but don't just come to the online meetings. Show up at the other activities and things that we're offering as well. It's really important to participate in the diversity of the community engagement resources and activities that are being brought before you, and to also give ideas about other things that we can do. All we hear most of these meetings is, I don't want this, I don't want that, this is bad, this is bad. So what we want to start hearing more is, this is what works, this is what we're looking for, this is what we're interested in. How about these ideas? That would be really cool. So I just want to put that out there. And again, thank you all for being here, and keep spreading the word and show up. And I hope to see some of you either at our pop-up exhibit at the Grove Hall Library this Thursday, or at K's Oasis at the Consult Lila event, because those are two different events that are happening about this project, and there'll be many more to come. Thanks and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Good
Good
night.
night.